Welcome to Legacy Builders, Strategies for Building Successful Family Enterprises, brought to you by Beacon Family Office at Asante Financial Management Limited. I'm your host, Corey Gagnon, Senior Wealth Advisor, and on this show, we explore global ideas, concepts, and models to help family enterprises better navigate the complexities of family wealth. Today, we welcome Thomas Clark, Chief Operating Officer at Veritage International. Thomas brings over a decade of experience in the family business field, starting his journey in 2010 at the Business Families Foundation in Montreal. He excelled in education and content development in creating extensive interactive tools for enterprising families. After Business Families Foundation merged with Family Enterprise Canada in 2020, Thomas became the National Director of Content Development, focusing on Canadian family business research. He's known for his passion for preparing and supporting the next generation to flourish in their roles. My goal is to be the most curious person in today's conversation with Thomas Clark, as we explore his journey from an educator to becoming the COO of Veritage International. We'll delve into how Thomas's diverse experiences in teaching, family business dynamics, and organizational leadership have shaped his unique approach to emotional governance and relational dynamics within family enterprises. Together, we'll uncover Thomas's insights on cultivating a shared language within families, the importance of collective learning, and his strategies for developing intrapreneurship and good ownership across generations. Now, let's dive in. Welcome, Thomas. We're excited to have you here today to share your wealth of knowledge and experiences with us. Let's dive in, shall we?
Thanks, Corey.
Now, Thomas, imagine you're delivering the commencement speech to the graduating class of 2024, and you have the chance to inspire them with your story. How would you begin your speech to convey the incredible lessons and expertise that you've gained along your career?
Well, it's a really good question, Corey. I think I would probably start my speech with a quote, or what's been mentioned as a Greek proverb, and that is that a society grows great when people plant trees in whose shade they shall never sit. And I actually heard about this quote a couple of years ago, in not verbatim, but the head coach of the Montreal Canadiens, which is my favorite hockey team, as a big sports guy, Martin St. Louis, who's the head coach, he mentioned that in the context of having kind of an older set of players and a younger set of players, and really wanting the older set of players to set the culture and really be a guiding light for kind of the younger players, understanding that when the team is ready to succeed, they most likely won't be there, right? They will have moved on, either retired or perhaps gotten traded, contracts and what have you. And I think that's a really important lesson for anybody to really take. And within that, I would really kind of, not to be too cliche, but, I think it's important for people to, be self-aware and understand your needs and dreams and aspirations, but also that it's not necessarily always about you. And you have the ability to also kind of be that high tide that lifts all boats. To be a good citizen, whether that's in your behavior, in your family, in what you give back to the community, what have you. And it also reminds me, another place I would go is one of the better commencement speeches I've ever heard was Arnold Schwarzenegger's, where he basically said, people say I'm a self-made man, but I'm anything but. And he talks about all the people that helped him when he moved to the United States. The people from the gym that brought him plates and pillows and this and that. And I think that's a really important message nowadays, that it's okay to ask for help. And, if you want to try and go it alone and be that self-made person, hats off to you. The majority of successful people that I know did not have that path, and they were helped or asked for help or offered help and took it. And I think that's really an important lesson to take, not only in kind of who you surround yourself with, but also your own path.
Right.
And I came from a relatively formal background. I went to a good school. I'm the third of three kids. But when it became my choice in terms of what I wanted to do, I did something very different than what my brother and my sister did. And they actually supported me, encouraged me to do this. And that's because I guess I realized, thanks to them, that I was able to make my own choices and I was able to kind of live my own life. And it doesn't necessarily mean I needed to go down the same path. I could go down a bit different path, but I also needed to understand, how can I contribute by going down this path? How can I contribute to me as an individual and being someone realizing my full potential? How can I contribute to supporting those that I love and that whose life I want to be invested in? But also maybe how can I contribute to something that I'm passionate about that I want to kind of have long lasting in my life? And I think that's the last thing, is just, particularly when you're addressing the young generation, is you really, as someone who's in his 40s who still feels quite young, you know, you have a lot of your life to work and dedicate to things. And I think it's really important that you find something that you're passionate about. And you may not always get to reap the benefits and rewards of that. Sometimes you are part of the journey in getting to the end goal, but you're still playing a valuable part of that. So that kind of comes back to you don't always get to enjoy the shade. But I think those are some things that I would want to convey in the speech I would give.
I love that. So much wisdom there, Thomas. As you mentioned, in your 40s, I think the fact what I heard is so much information and stories that you have garnered from others, and your background and the journey that you've been on, just that wisdom from the research, from listening to other stories, what you've been able to convey here. So, not that we're here to talk about the Montreal Canadiens. I know you'd love to spend the hour chatting about
Anytime.
but thinking about a sports team as it relates to a family enterprise, how do you see those connections of those younger players, of that mentorship of the older ones who maybe have won the cup or gotten to the end? How would you bring those similarities in?
Well, it's an interesting question, and it conflicts me somewhat because I'll take it to a different sport, and that's the sport of rugby. My role currently is the COO of Veritage International, and the CEO and managing director and founder, Franco. Him and I have a love of rugby. The problem is that our love of rugby is kind of on opposite sides of the spectrum. My mother's originally from Southern Africa, South Africa, Zimbabwe, and so I'm a huge Springboks fan. South African Springboks, I love them. Franco is a huge New Zealand All Blacks fan. And if you know anything about rugby, those are kind of the two competing forces. But
Yes.
I'm going to take a lesson from the All Blacks, and that is that they have a culture where their principle is you leave the jersey in a better place than you kind of found or took it. And it's similar to a family business. If we want to look at a larger trajectory of maybe not just 5 or 10 or 25 years, but a legacy, what the All Blacks are saying is every time that you step into that jersey, you have a culture responsibility to uphold the values and principles that we hold dear and that embody who we are. But you also have a responsibility of keeping it in good shape and perhaps progressing it for the next generation of player. And I think the parallels to the multi-generational aspects in family business are quite clear. I mean, when we look at a family business, we want it to succeed generally, and we want it generation over generation to be in a better place than it was previously. And I don't mean financially. In fact, the financial aspect of that would probably come last. What I mean is, are we improving our relationships? Are we improving what it means to be part of this team, part of this family? Are we clear on what is the objective and what is the goal that we're going for? Because, in rugby, you're a 15-person squad on the field. If you don't know what the plan is, if you don't know where you want to get, you're going to have 15 people running in different directions. Now, family may be smaller, over generations, it may be bigger. But what is that kind of red thread? What is that North Star that everybody is trying to achieve? And I think it's really important to be able to be self-aware enough and understand your role and your contribution within that system to, again, understand that you have a role in cultivating, but also progressing and propagating this culture to have it become something that the people before you would be proud of, but also the people that are going to come next would be proud of and can really take and carry forward.
I love that. The fact that the family might not be as large as the team on the field, but actually knowing each other well enough to understand where that person's headed and to be able to pass the ball or to receive from them and know how to communicate appropriately. That's a great connection.
It is. And even to add to it, when you look at my kind of comparison there, it's a national team, right? And if you look at national team in any sport, it's a collection of individuals that generally play on different clubs. And they may not even play in the same country, right? And, families are a little bit different. You're from the same place and what have you. But nowadays, families are often very geographically dispersed, right? And you might go to school somewhere different than where your parents went. You might have the opportunity to travel and discover new cultures. But at the end of the day, how can we kind of bring that back to be successful as a team, as a unit, even if we're not always playing on the same field together? And that's where really the learning comes in. And I come from a background of kind of education and studying education and having education be really a foundational role in how I got into kind of the family business industry. And I lean on that as sort of the glue that really can help families kind of tie themselves together and speak the same language.
Right. And so that language that they're creating, Thomas, in your experience, where are they building that language from? As you mentioned, cultures, they might be geographically dispersed, and some of that connection might be difficult to find in what somebody would naturally say. Here's what connects us outside of the fact that we are family, maybe are in this business together. But what are they doing from that perspective?
Well, I think this is not any sort of earth-shattering revelation, but when it comes to things like that, it's really kind of one of two approaches. Either it's top down, being like, this is how we do things, this is how we speak about things, and this is how it's going to be. Or it's more bottom up, where can we co-create? Can we create this new language? Can we take our collective experiences and harness them into something that's really, really positive? And I've always, again, a lot to do with my background, my educational background, and my work experience. But I believe that families need to learn together. And I'm not saying that you need every week to go and learn something. I'm saying that families should have a learning budget. You should, as a family, whether it be a day session on something you're interested in your local town, or there's a retreat that really intrigues you about something that you feel could really help your family get over an obstacle or really propel them forward. Those are instances where I believe families need to make those more of a priority. One thing that I remember years ago, I was working for Family Enterprise Canada, and we were doing our family summit of minds in Banff, and there was a couple of families that came there, and they came to the retreat, but then they also decided to take a couple of days afterwards and go somewhere else and spend time together and just talk about what they learned and how they might be able to integrate it, or how might it change their perspective on where they want to go, or their relationship and how they're working together. That blew my mind. Like, everybody that's in a family business needs to do that. I would say probably once a year. You'd probably want to do it more than that, but find time to learn together and to develop that language together. Because I can tell you, just like we have in other experiences in our lives, if you're being told to do something a certain way and you're being put in a box, you're probably going to get a little bit uncomfortable in that box at some point. And I think it'd be more valuable to have that co-creation. And what sticks in my mind is years ago, being able to interview John Davis, who, you know, everybody knows who John Davis is. And he really at the time, and I'm sure still does, advocate for a closer relationship between the senior and junior generation. And the more time they can kind of work together, the better they're going to be able to co-create these things and kind of build what it is they want to build going forward.
Absolutely.
And so I think that that's kind of where it starts, is learning together and being able to build that language and a little bit together.
I love that. And so there's a few things that I want to follow up on. The learning budget. So setting that in place, you know, so often we have, and just thinking about public companies where they establish a budget and, you know, maybe even more so governments, you know, they set a budget and now, geez, we need to spend that money. And there's points in the calendar where it's, how do we get this spent? And how do families become proactive enough to know that this is what's happening? You know, you talked about Family Enterprise Canada, and I know there's many other organizations that have these retreats, but something where we can be proactive and know that that budget isn't just being spent because we said we're spending it, but there's some mindfulness there.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great point. I mean, I think there needs to be buy-in on any time you're doing something like this, and there needs to be an inclusive aspect to it. I don't think it would work if, you know, the leader says we're going to have this budget and it's really just going to be able to fund me to go to Tokyo for FBN's global summit. I mean, great, but how is that kind of benefiting the group? Now, in my experience, a lot of this starts with a family learning champion, right? Someone who really says, okay, we're becoming kind of a professionalized family here. I definitely can see that there might be some issues coming down, whether it be relational or on the ownership side or what have you. We really should kind of get ahead of it. Now, I think if you're going to go about having some type of learning budget, there needs to be, and I use this term somewhat more loosely than it traditionally is used, is governance around it, meaning this is not you're going to a conference and coming back. It's if you're going to learn something, then there needs to be a back end portion where, okay, let's all get together and kind of hear about what was learned. Now, right. I do think it works a lot better if you have a group go together. So what I've seen a lot of families do is sort of plan out your year, right? So much like we do a financial yearly plan, we're going to do a family learning yearly plan where we're going to look at what's available to us. We're going to look at our schedules and we're going to pick one or two things that we're all going to be able to attend. And we're going to make it a priority by putting it in our calendars and not having other things kind of take it off the calendar.
Right.
You know, early on in my career, someone told me that you vote with your agenda. And that's something that has always stayed true to me. If you're not making it a priority, it's because you're choosing not to make it a priority. I think, you know, learning together and learning as a family, I think has tremendous benefits, but they aren't necessarily like you don't get your return on investment right away. And that's where there needs to be a little bit of patience within families. We often talk about patient capital and, you know, seed funding with families and things like this, but we also need to be patient and understanding that if we're going to go and learn something and we're going to try and make even a small change in what we're doing, maybe in our family meetings, like it's not going to happen at, you know, overnight. We're going to have to work at it like anything else. We're going to have to practice, right? You want to get good at anything in life, you're probably going to have to practice it. So I think it needs to be thoughtful. It needs to be inclusive. But it often really starts with, much like anything, a little spark, and that is usually the learning champion in the family that says, I think we should be doing something on this front.
And to go back to your comment about the tree, in learning, how do we know that there's a little sapling there coming out of the ground, that the tree is actually starting to grow, and that this will provide shade one day. Like, what's a family using to measure the success and to say, we're making a difference here and that future generation will see the benefit?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think each family needs to kind of develop their own KPIs. And again, I use KPIs very loosely here because a lot of what we're talking about isn't necessarily tangibly measured easily, right? Now, I'll give you an example from my work now. So, as I mentioned, working for Veritage, we work really on the emotional governance and relational and behavioral aspects within families, right? So when I joined the firm about 14 months ago, I met one of our client families. We had a chat and sort of trying to get to know them a little bit. And I was so struck at how they spoke to each other, in that they were recognizing each other's improvements in how they were speaking to one another. They were saying, I really appreciate you telling me that and saying that, because 6 months ago, you would not have said that to me.
Right.
Right. So they were noticing changes in one another and being encouraging about it, because they actually saw it as helping them move the conversation along, not have it be so personal all the time. And I think that's really important, is being able to recognize change in yourself, having a level of self-awareness, but also encouraging others and supporting others if you see change in them. And it could be, that I heard this thing at this conference and it really sparked something in me and I really want to know more about it. Great. Explore more about it. Anytime you have something, let's go for a coffee. I'd love to hear more about it. Being able to be supportive, inclusive, and recognizing positive change in people when they're actually trying to do that, I think is really important. And that's how we can get to a level of kind of transparency and honesty in a lot of our conversations. And so that is just a piece from, my everyday, where it struck me because it occurred to me, we don't really tell each other that often.
Absolutely.
I don't really say to my friends, hey, you've really made an interesting change here, like, way to go. I just kind of internalize it a bit. Well, I wonder what that's about.
Yeah.
And it was so refreshing to be able to see siblings just say, wow, I really appreciate you standing up for what you believe in there, but in like a very respectful, honest manner.
And that's a culture, not only a culture shift in the development they made, but also establishing that culture to celebrate those small wins, those achievements. And, in our conversation and going back to what Franco and I had talked about in our episode, which our listeners can go back and talk about, is really that safety that family has to be able to make those comments to each other. To it's one of those things, going back to the sports comment, is you say that in the locker room with your sports buddies, they might look at you and say, what are you talking about? And right, so how does a family feel safe enough where not going to be shunned for making those comments?
That's a really good point, Corey, and really good question. And I think where I come at it from in a family business, and it may kind of differ in sports, is not everything needs to be like a zero-sum winner and loser game. And this goes in your own relationships as well. And I've had this in my family, and like I've spoken to my family about it. If you're in a conversation with someone you care about, you honestly care about, and perhaps it's a debate, it's an argument, what have you, if you leave that conversation saying, I won that, that means that person that you care about lost.
Right.
And in my opinion, if that happens in a family business, if anybody leaves a family meeting, an owner's council, what you name it, board of directors, you name it, if they leave there being like, I think I lost, everybody has lost. It is a L for the organization. So I think an attitude shift at all levels of families, in business, or even individuals, don't look at everything like you have to win. Because if you have to win that and you care about the person, they're losing. And I get, business deals and things like that, I think that's a separate thing. I'm talking about the kind of relational dynamic. We're in this together. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind, that anytime you're winning, someone you care about is losing, and that is just an L for the organization.
Absolutely. Well, and going back to your comment that it's not all about me, how do we cultivate that attitude where we're rising, everybody is in it together, that we all need to be winning, or we're not, like nobody's winning if we're not all winning.
Well, I think there certainly needs to be a level of individual and collective self-awareness. There also needs to be just that comfort and safety. So I come from a family business, okay? And I can tell you that as someone in their 20s, I would not have succeeded regardless of what the family business was. I would not have succeeded. I didn't know who I was. I wanted to kind of quote unquote find myself. I wanted to travel. I wanted to learn about different cultures. I wanted to experience those things. I didn't want to go do more schooling after university necessarily, although eventually I did, but it took me 4 or 5 years to realize that's what I wanted to do. We need to give ourselves a little bit of room to breathe and understand that just like we mature physically at different rates, we also mature emotionally at different rates.
Right.
And if I had been put into a position in my family business, which don't no longer exist, although my dad did kind of reinvent it, I would not have succeeded. But I would have needed to realize that. I think I realized that a little bit later in life, but I did realize that that was not for me. But I also would have had to explain that probably to my parents, and that probably would have been disappointing to them if they had the desire or expectation that I was going to come into the business. And maybe it wouldn't have been, I'm not coming into the business, but it's just now is not the time for me. I don't know what my contribution can be. And if I'm going to come into the business, I want to be clear on how I can contribute. And I want, your buy-in and everybody's buy-in and to go through the proper steps. So, I think that's okay. It's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to not feel ready. But I think it's important that we feel safe enough to be able to admit that and share that and perhaps even work on that together as a multi-generational team. Because even if you're not in business together, you're still in family together, you're still a team on that front.
Yes.
I guess, you get a little bit older and you look back on your younger years and maybe realize that a bit more than you did at the time. Like I knew I wouldn't have been good in an office when I was 25, and I wasn't afforded that opportunity, and that's fine. But had I known that, and it's incumbent on me to have that conversation, or if the conversation's not happening, I got to start that. Say, listen, I see what's going on here, but I got to tell you, I'm not ready for this.
Right.
And what can we do to maybe make myself ready if that's something I'm interested in? But then that also goes into some of the experiences I had younger. Is I do think you really have to create a more of an emotional bond to the business than just here's a job, here's the money, off we go.
Right. And so creating that opportunity and that freedom of choice, how can that elder generation create that where they're still cultivating that talent and allowing that rising gen to develop themselves, not just scholastically, as you mentioned, from education perspective, but really that emotional intelligence at the same time? How can they balance the needs of the individual and bringing the greater family along?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts first and foremost with understanding each other, understanding who we are as individuals within this family. What are our dreams, our hopes, and our aspirations? And honestly, not within the context of what are your dreams, hopes, and aspirations within the business. No, no, no. What are your dreams, hopes, and aspirations in your life?
Right.
And I think it's important that I've been working for 13 years, and sometimes, and I laugh about it with my wife, it's like I pick my head up. It's like I feel I've been working for a long time, but like I'm not even halfway through my career. And like it's a long time to be doing anything. You really got to love what you're doing.
Definitely.
You know what I mean? You've really got to love what you're doing. But the best answer I've found in the context of family business is something that I ran with a number of years ago when I was working for the Degaspe-Beaubien family and the Business Families Foundation, the concept of intrapreneurship. So what we were seeing, this was in 2015 or 2016, we developed like an incubator for all intents and purposes, where it was all about bringing family business intergenerationally together, mom, dad, or whoever's running the business and next gen, around a project that is led by the next gen, but is kind of advised on by their parents or the senior gen. And it wasn't always their parents. There was a couple instances where, executive from the family business was there. And there was a couple of reasons we did this. So the first one was seeing that there's a lot of families out there, and it's still true today, which is a little bit troubling, but what are we going to do with the business now? We're getting into our 60s. Do we have a transition plan? The kids might be doing something different. What are we going to do here?
Right.
As well as maybe we're losing the opportunity of bringing the kids in. So we developed this incubator that really brought in the two generations around a project that could be seen as an add-on to the existing family business. So is there something we could do that can leverage some of our expertise, but maybe in a completely different field or in a different industry? We have the ability within our business. We have a marketing department. We have a legal department. We have HR. We have admin. Could some of these resources be loaned out to this project, not at will, but at, let's say, 2 hours a week or a couple hours a month, that the next gen could use that kind of knowledge that we've built within the business to help further their project. Right. And we saw a number of really interesting instances where, next gen who really wanted nothing to do with the business were able to develop a project of their own that was, there was some funding that went into it, but it was more resources and guidance that were being given to them and kind of allowance to say, go and do this. If this is something you're interested in, you have our support in doing it. And some of it did revolve around the business, modernizing how they intake orders and things like that. But some of it was totally outside. And I think the one refreshing thing that I took from it was the parents or the senior generation were really interested and curious in how they could harness the knowledge of their next generation. They weren't looking at it as they don't want to be a part of this. They were looking at it more from a positive standpoint as, I think my next gen has good idea. I believe in them. Let's see what we can kind of do out of this. And so I think when we're looking at particularly the transition or succession coin, I think it's incumbent upon us to look at maybe the more positive side of it sometimes and not, oh, what are we going to do? They're not ready. They're not willing. And what are they ready and willing and good at?
Absolutely.
Can we look at that? Can we do something with that? Because I think everybody, a lot of people in family businesses that even if they're not interested in it, can we develop them into good owners? And that's, as an aside, something that the younger generation, I don't think fully grasps is the difference between an owner and a manager of a family business, or the CEO and the owner. I think even if you don't want to be in the manufacturing plant and run the day-to-day, you have a strategic mindset. Can we harness that to be a good owner in our family business system? There's ways of looking at it more positively, and how can we use the resources and the knowledge and the skills that this person has developed to our benefit, as opposed to just saying, it's not aligned with what we do. Go do your own thing, and we'll let you know when the dividend is ready.
Right. Yes. And so, Thomas, going back to that project, just thinking about a family member who's listening to us, and, you made the comment about bringing that connection, that rising gen, the connection between them and the business. I feel like there was a lot of byproducts that came of this project, and what you realized as the rising gen was going through, and the executives and the now generation, and bringing that wisdom and those resources to it. I'm just thinking about sustainability of the enterprise as well in bringing some of these new ideas. How much of that, just thinking about going in and what is the expectation is really kind of where my question is. Is it expectation that they'll love the business and want to keep the business? Is the expectation that they're developing their strategies and it's an educational opportunity? Or is it multifaceted and really, as you said, that curiosity of let's just see where this goes and we could have something that we didn't expect?
Yeah, I think all of those things. I think a lot of the people that want to pursue something like this or that we interacted with in the program, they were like the senior generation, they were entrepreneurs at their core. They had a family business for sure, but they were entrepreneurs. And a lot of that entrepreneurial DNA had clearly trickled down to their children because their children had a very similar mindset. When I say children, I mean these were adults in their 20s that had already had a career and what have you. That was a big part of it. I think one of the kind of back end benefits of doing that, and the other thing that I'll tack on to that is I did research a number of years ago, and one of the things that a next gen told us that really helped them was they had a rotational program as they were coming into the business. So rotational program, the intrapreneurial thing where you have access to different departments, like all of it is in a goal of understanding what it is we do. Like, how does this business work? Can we do what we want to do, but also understand it a little bit better? Right. And maybe by doing that, we can see, maybe the next gen does want to be more involved. Maybe they don't, and that's fine. And we can do the kind of ownership thing. But I think there are really tangible benefits to having that interaction with the business and the people within the business. Now, I will say, like, this is certainly not for everybody. And within those organizations that did join this incubator, there was buy-in top to bottom. Like, people within the business, managers within the business understood that this was something they were going to look at. And oh, by the way, if you guys have great ideas, whether you're family or not, I want to hear about them. Right. So it was kind of the first step in, we are a family business, but maybe we're slightly more of an entrepreneurial family, or the way we see ourselves is more of an entrepreneurial family. Now, the one other thing I want to mention here is you mentioned a couple of terms around kind of expectation and things like that. And I think, and I don't know if you discussed this with Franco, but he has this concept that I really, really love. And he called it the director. And essentially the short form is that if your desires for something to happen are not communicated, then your expectations of that desire will not be met.
Right.
And what happens then is you get resentful that the expectations weren't met and your desires weren't met. And then you start judging and punishing, right? So the first step is the desire piece. We need to communicate our desires. Senior gen or current owner, founder, next gen. If we don't communicate what our desires are for the business, for ourselves, for the family as a whole, then our expectations are going to be unmet and we're going to go into that resentment, judgment, and inevitably punishment waterfall. And I think that's what we want to avoid. So having those early conversations, but also understanding that there are opportunities here and they may lead to A, they may lead to B, they may lead to Z. Like, who knows? But let's give it a chance.
I love that. That's a great way as we transition and near the end of our conversation today. Thomas, there's a few questions that I ask each guest before we wrap up. Are you ready for the tough ones?
I am, yes.
All right. Now, what is one key strategy that you believe is most essential for building a successful family enterprise?
Well, am I allowed to be repetitive?
You are. Yeah, I think that this is a great opportunity to circle back and tie it all together.
So I do think I would say the one strategy is learning, but I think that is multifaceted. I think we need to learn who we are as individuals, what makes us tick, what makes us react, how we behave, understanding those things before we can really be a productive member of a larger piece. So learning about ourselves, learning about our families, our family history, learning about the individuals that are in our lives more deeply. I can't remember who I was talking to. We were talking to someone recently, and they said, instead of asking people, what do you do? Ask people, what do you like to do? Instead of learning about their job, you learn about more about who they are. It's like take that essence into kind of everything we do and learn together and grow together. I really think is the fundamental strategy. I would put that if I started a family business today, that would be at the core of everything we did.
Fantastic. And what is the most common challenge that you see family enterprises encountering when it comes to wealth transition and generational continuity?
I would say having the emotional conversations, and I'll speak from a next gen perspective, and that is the fear of like letting our parents down, or the fear of saying the things that you really want to say, but they may not want to hear.
Right.
But I think those are really, really important things. I had a situation in my family around, an asset that really means something to me. And it's not the asset that means something to me, it's what it represents. It's a place where I get together with my family. And in conversations about what are we going to do with this and health concerns or this, the message was I don't care about the sale or this or that. I care about I'm going to lose the place where I get to talk to you guys and I get to be with you guys. And it was very difficult for me to have that, to say that. But it was very impactful for everybody in the family to hear, like, let's not talk about it as this financial asset. Let's talk about it as what it means to us. What does it represent? And I think if we can get to that level of communication with each other, we're going to feel a lot safer to have the more difficult conversations of, I'm not quite sure if this is for me and what have you. And in a lot of the research that we see in terms of wealth transition and generational continuity, to me, what's missing are really the difficult conversations of what are we going to do with this? Is the next gen want to be involved? Do we need it for our livelihood? All those questions, I really don't think that those conversations are happening. And if they're happening, they're not happening enough.
I really like what you said in being able to hear and be in tune with my own needs as well as others. So you can't communicate what you're feeling and what you need if you're not in tune with yourself. And I feel like there's so many people who they feel something, but they don't know why, and they can't articulate what it is. So it's not that I want the multi-million dollar cottage, it's that there's so many memories of that cottage or whatever it might be. And how do we communicate that instead of starting to fight about it because we can't let go?
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I mean, I think that's dead on. And the other thing that comes into it, I've had a really difficult time accepting that like my parents are aging and then they're not going to be around one day. It's a very difficult thing for me to think about. And I also kind of play that because like I want their life to be good. I want to contribute to them having a good life. They're in their late 70s. Like I don't want to be a source of more consternation and anxiety for them. But I would be doing myself a disservice if I didn't tell them how I really felt.
Right.
And we can work through that together, but
Totally.
I can't hold it to myself.
Yes. And such a balance. There's so much there. Now, Thomas, in your experience, what are the top three qualities that successful family enterprise leaders possess?
So I think they possess a lot of things. The three things that sort of come to my mind right away are they're good listeners, good communicators, but first and foremost are good listeners. They have kind of an inclusive mindset. They think maybe more of the whole than themselves or the individuals. And they probably need to have some level of prognostication. And let me expand on those three things. So I think in terms of listening, I think we need a greater focus paid to kind of the human capital piece of our family business. So more on how are our people doing versus how is our business doing more often. Like we need the balance to shift a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I think we need an openness to be able to share when things are challenging, and to be able to kind of have those open conversations about dreams, needs, and aspirations, and kind of take that into account. I think the inclusive piece, I think everybody really needs to feel valued within a family business. But I also think it's important to include at a very young age. And just quickly, like, an emotional connection was made to our family business. As I said, it doesn't exist anymore, but it was in, my grandfather started and it was in food brokerage. And so when I was growing up, my dad and his two brothers ran the business, and they had this big warehouse where, they had all these products that they would house before they went out to Costco or grocery store, what have you. And the entrepreneurs that they would go to work on the weekends and often bring the kids, and we'd run around and be running around with my cousins and my siblings and using the telephone and what have you. But inevitably we'd run into the warehouse and we where are the candy bars and this and that. And we were included in the physical space. The parents could have said, leave the kids at home, we have to go work, but they included us in the work. And to this day, I mean, I was probably, 7 years old, 8 years old to 10 years old when this was happening. But to this day, 30 something years later, like, the smell of cardboard, I immediately go back to that warehouse. Like, I'm a kid, I'm running around that warehouse with my siblings and my cousins, and we're looking for Mars bars anytime I smell cardboard. But I wouldn't have that emotional connection to that place if I hadn't been included. And they probably weren't even thinking about this, but it's like, we're bringing the kids to work today. And that was important for me to be able to see the environment, see my father in that environment, but also be able to leave the house a little bit. And then the prognostication, like, I think it's probably not the right word, but, I think we need to continually check in with each other, understand how we're doing, and understand as individuals what that might mean for the longer term on our family business. So if you have a next gen and they're not really that interested in it, that's fine. But you might need to anticipate what's going to happen in 5, 10, 15 years. And if you're not able to do that, it probably doesn't have terrible, terrible consequences. But I do think that I understand business cycles are a lot shorter, but I do still think having that slightly longer term view in a family business is really beneficial, because yes, the business is the bottom line, but I think the impact that family businesses can have on the individuals within them, on the workers, on the community, whether that be really local or provincial or however you define it, I think it's good to have a predictive view on where you want to go there and who might belong to that kind of vision.
Right.
So, we often talk about vision, but, you kind of have to predict where you want to go and then start building the steps on how you're going to get there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Without the steps, it's just a dream. So you need to actually put it to work.
That's right.
Now, Thomas, before we conclude our discussion, I'd like to highlight where our listeners can engage in more of the conversations that you're having, be it what you're contributing to, what you're listening to, and where our guests can find you.
Yeah, sure. So I don't have as large of a social media presence as a lot of other people, but I'm on LinkedIn, Thomas Clark. You can find all the stuff we do at veritage.ca. That's the firm that I work with. A lot on the emotional governance piece, as I said, on really kind of understanding ourselves and understanding kind of where we belong in the family system. And, I would just encourage people to, learn as much as you can about yourself and what you're doing and what you want to do. And sometimes that's, putting on a good piece of music and trying to absorb in that. It's not always what it is we're doing. And I think that's really important. So take some time for yourself, but also, if you want to learn more about what we're doing, that's where you can find us and find me on LinkedIn.
Sounds great. And, I think quite humble in that your journey, as you mentioned, a little over a decade, but you've left a lot of breadcrumbs along the way. So the work that you've done with Business Family Foundation, the programs that exist today at Family Enterprise Canada because of your contribution. The work that you and Peter Jackowitz had done, and I'm sure that I'm not even mentioning everything. So a lot that we'll link in the notes to make sure that it's not just what you're doing today. And I know that the work that you and Franco and the team are doing will have just as much impact and things that'll live on beyond what you're up to in the future. So
Great. Well, I really appreciate that, Corey. All those organizations and people you mentioned were the high tide that lifted my boat. So hopefully I can start giving back myself as well.
I love that. Thomas, I wanted to make sure that we covered everything today. Is there anything along our conversation that you'd like to share with our audience that we didn't get a chance to touch on?
No, I mean, I think we covered a lot of things. I appreciate your questions. I thought they were very thought provoking, but nothing off the top of my head, Corey. I'm pretty happy with the conversation we had, and hopefully we'll continue to reflect on it and listen to it when it's out.
Sounds great. Well, thank you, Thomas, for taking the time to share your expertise and experience with us today. I've found it incredibly valuable and learned a lot. So I'm grateful for that. And I'm sure our listeners will as well.
Thanks, Corey.
As we wrap up this episode, we invite you to reflect on Thomas's insights about the balance between individual aspirations and family unity. Whether you are part of a family enterprise or provide consulting to family businesses, Thomas' emphasis on understanding personal aspirations, fostering good ownership, and creating growth opportunities within family business provides valuable guidance. Throughout our discussion, we explored the parallels between sports teams' dynamics and family enterprises, uncovering valuable lessons on legacy, culture, and sustainable growth. We delved into the concept of a family learning budget and the importance of collective learning experiences. His insights on developing entrepreneurship within family businesses and fostering good ownership across generations offer a practical framework for navigating the complex landscape of family enterprises. These perspectives provide valuable guidance for families, emphasizing the need for open communication, recognizing individual aspirations, and creating opportunities for growth within family enterprise. For those seeking expert guidance on family enterprise dynamics and developing family emotional capital and collective learning within a family business context, Thomas Clark and the team at Veritage International are ready to assist. We've included Thomas's contact information along with links to Veritage International's website and additional resources in the show notes to support you on your journey. Thank you for joining me, Corey Gagnon, your host of Legacy Builders Podcast. It's my personal passion to explore with you these topics related to family wealth. If you enjoyed today's episode, you can subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your preferred podcast platform. And don't forget to share this episode with family, friends, and colleagues who you care about. If you'd like to help support this show, you can do so by leaving a rating and review. If you have any questions about anything shared on today's episode, or have topics you'd like us to dive deeper into in future episodes, please let us know by emailing beaconfamilyoffice@asante.com. That's beaconfamilyoffice@assante.com. Legacy Builders, Strategies for Building Successful Family Enterprises is brought to you by Beacon Family Office at Asante. Are you worried about losing what you've created and seeking ways to transition your wealth across generations? Beacon Family Office at Asante supports our clients transition their wealth while maintaining relationships. If you'd like to access more content we've created, you can visit us at beaconfamilyoffice.com or for more details on our services and book an initial call. Thanks again for listening, and until next episode, stay intentional about building your legacy. This program was prepared by Corda Gagnon, who is a senior wealth advisor with Beacon Family Office at Asante Financial Management Limited. This is not an official program of Asante Financial Management, and the statements and opinions expressed during this podcast are not necessarily those of Asante Financial Management. This show is intended for general information only and may not apply to all listeners or investors. Please obtain professional financial advice or contact us at beaconfamilyoffice@asante.com or visit beaconfamilyoffice.com to discuss your particular circumstances prior to acting on the information presented.